Hey guys, this is Mr. V over here doing a book review today for The Rape of Nanking by Chang. This is a nonfiction book that takes place in December of 1937 when Japan invaded China, Nanking, and they performed the Nanking Massacre, where they raped, tortured, and murdered over 300,000 Chinese civilians. And that takes place in 1937-38. So I just want to give you guys a warning if you're considering this book, is that this is a brutal book. It's an interesting book, it's very educational, but it is a brutal book because it took place right before World War II, December of 1937, and it deals with, I just told you, murder, rape, torture. So I would suggest that you be over the age of 18 if you're considering reading it, but you can also take tough scenarios because while she doesn't go too far in detail, she still talks about it to an extent. And the murders were horrible. And she even commented in the book that the rivers were sometimes ran red with blood. And I think it was a real thing. It was not even just a fictional. And because again, this is a nonfiction thing. The writing style, though, if you're considering it, the writing style is very interesting because she did a great job in documenting it because you got to see a lot of different perspectives. As she documents sometimes from different journals that people wrote. Some were written by the Chinese, some were written by Europeans, some were written by Americans, a few even by the Japanese. So you get very different perspectives. Sometimes you see who were the victims. Sometimes you saw, others who saw what happened, and sometimes there was others who were just there to help. And so you get to see a lot of different things. And so the book, as I said, it talks about the invasion of Nanking in 1937 when Japan invaded, which was right before World War II, but Japan was starting to become very powerful at this point. And I was definitely interested in this book because I'm reading about World War II currently, but I feel that Japan is often an overlooked aspect. People remember Pearl Harbor a lot. They also remember the atomic bomb, for obvious reasons, but Japan gets overlooked a lot, whereas a lot of people focus on the Nazis. The Nazis were horrible, but Japan gets overlooked, yet Japan was very brutal. They were not good, and they did a lot of horrible things. They killed a lot of prisoners of war. They killed a lot of civilians. They treated civilians like they were less than animals, and they just did a lot of crazy stuff. They even played games with the civilians. The soldiers were playing games about who could kill people the fastest. It was just weird, and you get to see it in the book. But as I said, people overlook Japan. That's why I wanted to read more about it. And when reading about it, it's an interesting thing, but it's also kind of sad reading about it because it's sad seeing like how crazy humans can be. Because these are the actual soldiers. These aren't even the leaders who just are like telling them to go and fight and then losing 20,000 people. These are the soldiers who already have conquered an area and then they decide to start, uh, killing people more, torturing them. And as I said, it's not just killing. They did torture, they did rape, they played sick games. An example is they would do like forced incest like to people just for a game for some unknown sick reason. There's no reason for it. So the soldiers, it shows how crazy some of the soldiers were. And when you're reading it, it makes you wonder like, why are they doing this? It's just craziness. So it does go through it all. And as I said, it goes through the invasion and also the brief occupation because Japan did occupy Nanking for a few years and just how tough it was living under Japanese rule. I recently read a book about what it was like living under Nazi rule. So now I got to see what it's like living under Japanese rule. So you see the difficulties of living under it, but then you also see in the book, like it shows how great some people act under pressure. Because she briefly writes about a few brave people who like stayed behind to help, and they helped in many different ways. It wasn't just like helping in one way. There was many different people from different parts that stayed behind and helped. Like they knew the Japanese soldiers were coming, yet they were still like brave enough to stay behind and help people. So you aren't just reading about evils, but just be prepared that you will be reading about a lot of craziness when you read the book. And another cool thing about this book was she had like an analysis section at the very end where she describes like an analysis for like why the Japanese acted the way they did. And I found that a very interesting chapter. It still does not describe a lot of the things they did, but she still gives an analysis for why they did some of the things. So that was very interesting. And lastly, I would say another nice thing about the book was she covered what happened after the war. So I always feel it's important to know like what happens after. Yes, we know Japan lost, but more. You want to know a little bit more, and she goes in detail about what happened, more about what happened after, and even talking to some of the survivors, and you feel sympathy for those survivors, like what they had to live through, and then the rest of their life, and just how difficult it was. So this book, despite it being a fairly small-looking book, this book covers a lot in here, and it was definitely a very interesting read. Like, it makes you think a lot because it makes you wonder like why people can be so evil. As again, these are just the everyday soldiers, not the leaders, but the soldiers, and how crazy they are acting. And it makes you wonder like why, but then it makes you think a lot also about how crazy people are on the opposite perspective, in terms of, in a good way, about how brave people can be and how they're willing to stay behind to help people in need, and they're willing to risk their lives. And so it's kind of cool. It makes you think a lot. This book does show a lot, and it shows the craziness of war. This is leading right into World War II, and it shows you the craziness of war. So if you're interested in this book, I recommend this book for people who want to learn about like the Japanese during World War II, like how they were, how they acted. Because as I said earlier, the Nazis are often focused and Japanese get overlooked, but I think it's good to learn about both. You can see how crazy the Japanese were, and you see just how bad the Japanese were. And this is also one of the things that I think is overlooked in the United States about the Nanking massacres, often overlooked. So that's the reason I picked it up as well. So I recommend reading it if you're interested in that kind of stuff, but also make sure you can handle it, because that's a very important aspect, because it does get pretty brutal at times in the book, and it is nonfiction, so that also makes it a little more brutal. But if you guys enjoyed the book review today, hit the subscribe button. I always upload multiple different types of book reviews, but if you guys have any questions, you have any comments, please post it in the section below, because I always love hearing your opinions, your comments. Thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy your reading.